I had probably just got back or somewhere.
We are now live. So back to this. Oh wait, it's thinking about letting me do live. Got it. Okay, starting video. Maybe. There we go. Okay. Picture there, or close to it. At least the important players here. So we'll call this meeting of the Portage County Investment Advisory Committee for December 2022 to order. It is now 2:03 p.m. and in attendance are Brad Cromas, County Treasurer, County Commissioner Sabrina Christian Bennett, and Anthony Badalamenti, and our friends from Meter Investments. So roll call and call it order having been done. The first order of business is approval of the minutes from September 22nd. We have those in the packet, so whenever you're ready.
So moved.
I will second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And no opposition or abstention, so that carries. And we are then ready for our portfolio update. So take it away.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll
Really
share that
appreciate
on here as well.
it. And happy holidays to everyone.
Absolutely.
Yes, as we close out 2022, which has been a very interesting year and look to move forward into 2023.
Oh, yeah, we should be. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
So I can apologize for the issue there, y'all. Okay. I think it's that one. Sorry. You can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah,
perfect.
we'll catch up for it in a second.
Okay, so starting on page 3 here, what we're demonstrating here is comparing this current interest rate cycle that we've experienced so far in 2022, which has been in 9 months. The Fed has raised that overnight rate by over 4%. And this has been the fastest rate hike cycle that we've experienced in over 40 years.
And they're
So-
talking about it again,
Yeah.
2 more times. I've
Exactly.
heard.
Yes, that's exactly what the expectations are, is that 2 more rate hikes in 2023 that would get that overnight rate upwards of close to 5% market. We believe at that point, then the Fed will pause because, as we know, monetary policy flows through to the economy on a lag. Everyone doesn't feel it immediately.
Mhm.
And so clearly the Fed wants to see how this is impacting the economy, and more importantly, how it is through those means then serving to lower inflation, because the reason for this very abrupt, this very sharp increase in rates is to combat inflation, which, as we know, topped out at over 9%. In the summertime, it has since dropped down to 7% range, and that's looking at the headline consumer price index. But clearly, the pace of this cycle, not only having been so short so far compared to prior cycles, and the fact that it has been at a very rapid pace, is clearly presenting 2 things, challenges within the economy, but from an investor standpoint, it's presenting additional opportunities for us
Mhm.
that, from an interest income standpoint, looking forward, will be beneficial
Yeah.
to the county. So this path of raising interest rates has not been unique to the US. Because again, when we think about the reason for raising rates is to combat inflation here. Inflation has been a global problem. So as we look at this next page on page 4, we can see that central banks throughout the globe have also been raising rates throughout 2022. And we would anticipate that they would continue to follow pace with the US Fed. We always want to remember that we're one of the largest economies in the world. So what happens in the US impacts a lot of other countries. And as we said, with this inflation being global in nature, everyone is combating it in the same fashion.
With a raise in interest that quickly, how long does it take about to see the negative effect of that?
Yeah, generally monetary policy flows through the economy on about a 6-month lag. So when we think in terms of the first rate hike was back in March, only 9 months ago, it was March, when we had a 25 basis point hike, and then that was followed up with a 50, and then we had a string of 475s. I think really when we think in terms of that flowing through to the economy, the real flow is going to occur as the flow of those 4 75s.
So clearing to the first 6 months of
July.
2023,
Yes.
because right about September is when we've seen it flux in the housing market.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, to your point, and I think we may have discussed this previously, is, the initial hike in interest rates, of course, first negatively impacted those sectors of the economy that are very interest rate sensitive.
Mhm.
So the title businesses, the mortgage loan origination businesses and the like, it then also transferred over into the tech industry. We've seen a lot of pullbacks on tech. It's also has flown into the banking industry as we're starting to see banks, do some right sizing on their employees. And then interestingly enough, just earlier this month, we did see Pepsi announce that they were going to be laying off several hundred people out of their corporate headquarters. And you think, well, that's not really that many people in the grand scheme of things, but Pepsi is a very
Pretty big,
well run organization. So if they are taking steps to start cutting staff, they
No one can
seeing.
afford the sugar tax now.
Yeah.
Drink water.
Monetary policy becomes public health policy and all comes right together. It's all good.
Yeah, that blows into a brick wall.
So they're gonna be layering, several of these are layered on
Yes.
within that 6-month window,
Yes,
right? So I mean,
exactly.
that's kind of in terms of determining, like, if there is a over adjustment, let's say, determining what the over adjustment is
Right.
and how to undo it,
Yes.
seems like it could be difficult to.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly.
factors.
It's
At this rapid pace that they're
Yes.
doing it.
Mhm.
yes. Yeah, and kind of to your question, Tony goes through to this next page here where we
I don't want to belabor this other chart, but I do
Yes.
need to ask about Brazil because it's included. What's up with them?
Brazil.
Yeah.
Brazil.
Other than they're
Different.
Brazil and that's, we
That's
just,
it.
okay.
Other than-
That's fine.
Brazil.
Okay.
That's okay. Yeah, I think our strategy team just threw that in there as an attention getter.
Well, it worked.
It worked.
Yeah.
No. And they even did it in Spanish, it looks like. 'Cause I'm thinking Brazil's spelled wrong, but it's Banco Central. de
Yes.
Brasil.
We could get worse is what it means.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Or you
But
could be Japan with a negative rate, right? So,
yes, although they're actually going to start moving off of
Yeah,
that somewhat.
that's
They
what I heard.
increased their longer term targets.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
Yeah, I saw
it'll
that.
flow through. Yeah, they've been very much the outlier in keeping in that negative interest rate environment. I mean, the European Central Bank hung in there for quite some time and finally threw in the towel and jumped on the rate hike bandwagon. And I think they were in negative interest rates, oh my gosh, at least over a decade.
Mm.
So that's for them, definitely an adjustment too.
I always think it's always interesting because I realize it has to do to balance it out is
Right.
when everything, the cost of living and everything goes up, that's the best time to invest when no one has money to invest because everything's gone up. You got CD rates,
Yes,
4% for 11 months.
Mhm.
We haven't
Yeah.
seen that in years.
right. Yeah, you're right. In years, in 15 years. Yes. it's been a long
I worked in
time.
banking back then.
It's been a long
9%
time.
and home loans, but 5% passbook savings.
Right.
So,
Yeah, you're right. We are seeing rates that we have not seen since
yeah.
prior to the housing crisis.
Yeah.
And that was back in 2008. And a lot of concern has been, particularly when inflation had spiked in the summertime, is would we see a return to the interest rate environment that we had in the early 80s, which was then the double-digit inflation, the double-digit interest rates. And so, there was kind of that fear that was out there too, that this could really become a real runaway train.
Mhm.
But it appears as though, and I think that's what's contributed also to the Fed moving so quickly and so strongly, because it's unprecedented for them to have done 4 back-to-back 75 basis point rate
yeah.
hikes, is that to make sure or to try to prevent things from deteriorating to the conditions that we experienced in the early 1980s. And so all we can do is, see how this all pans out. We know theoretically how it should pan out, which is higher interest rates slows demand for goods and services, increases the cost of businesses,
Mhm.
and financing the businesses increases the costs for individuals to maybe sustain their lifestyle or, to buy a car or to buy a house. And so as interest rates rise, then businesses may not need to produce as much, services may not be quite in demand, the consumer may have to pull back on their spending. And so when we look at particularly this chart here, which in the first section shows GDP growth, which is an indication of the economic activity in the US, we can see prior to COVID. So this is before we even had the 2.5 years of kind of missing time. GDP was running at around a 2.3% rate. It's now a little bit higher, and that's because the consumer has been able to continue to lift the economy and keep it going through spending, albeit originally through stimulus dollars and savings from changes in behavior. But now we're starting to see a shift of the balances on credit cards is increasing. And when you think about it intuitively, and I think it's correct, higher balances and now interest rates are higher. That kind of does not set the table for good things to happen going in the future. So clearly, the Fed has forecasted at their most recent update on their projections, which they released in December, is that by the end of 2023, the U.S. economy, from an economic activity standpoint, will drop down to 0.50% of GDP growth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the market thinks that the U.S. economy will be in a recession in 2023.
Yes.
And the probability, the likelihood of that occurring, depending on who you ask, can range from 60% to 100%.
Mhm.
So we're in the camp that we believe it's highly likely the U.S. economy will slip into a recession in 2023.
So this projection is rose-colored glasses, you're saying?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, this has been the problem with the Fed all the way through
Yes.
this process, right? Is the
Yes.
credibility issue
Yes.
they've got based on it's transitory and then it's
Yes.
not, and then
Right.
so okay.
And then how is this going to work and how is this going to look? Yeah, because absolutely, when we look at the pace of the rate hikes, and then if we were to go back and look at what the Fed was projecting they would do, like kind of setting the stage, communicating, or setting market's expectations, and we go back to whether it was March or June or September, particularly March and June, the expectations that the Fed set were not such that to get rates to the levels where we are today, let alone where we think they will be in early 2023.
Denial.
Yeah, combination denial, right? I think the other factor too, and I don't want to say that this is in defense of the Fed, but the Fed has to also kind of walk that line between not scaring the market, I think.
Mhm.
And I think if the Fed were to come out and say, oh yes, we're going to have to push rates to the levels we saw in 1981, or the economy, and that's going to push the economy into a deep and prolonged recession, well, that would make it kind of a foregone conclusion because the market would potentially
React that way.
panic.
Mhm.
So I kind of get it. Fed has to kind of walk that moral suasion line of communicating expectations, getting the market to be aligned with where they think things will happen, and following the data. But again, the market also does set their own expectations, and that has, I think, helped to keep the market from being overly reactive to some of the economic data that we have seen.
I haven't heard anything, and maybe you can enlighten me. Has there been any response from the Fed to that line of thinking that the market is of the mind that there will be a recession, and
Mhm.
if there is a recession, then what does that do to the rest of these? I mean, because this is all, again,
Yes.
pretty rosy. Like this is where we want to be, and we'll be there by the end of next year.
Right.
They talked about that at all, or
Not really. They really haven't necessarily challenged, the market's expectations, because I think when we look at, the market's expectations, particularly on a long run basis for inflation,
Mhm.
the market's expectations for inflation on a long-term basis are pretty much aligned with the Fed's goal of where inflation should be, which is that 2 to 2.5% range. Now, granted, the Fed is saying we're not going to get there even at the end of 2023, we don't believe, but if they believe that continuing on this path, they will get there. But the market's expectations are not too far off. If the market's expectations were that inflation was going to be significantly higher, to your point, I think we would hear more conversation coming out of the Fed members to help position those expectations to be closer to what the Fed's goals are.
right?
But clearly, as things do soften, whether we just have a very soft landing or we do, enter into a recession, which we think is very probable. And depending on the extent, the duration and depth of the recession, as we know, many types of recessions, there's fallout, i.e. there's job loss. And, at this point, the Fed is projecting that we'll have minimal job loss, because when we think about it, if unemployment only rises to 4.6% by the end of 2023, that is fallout, but not to the extent that we have experienced in, of course, past slowdowns. And particularly when we think in terms of historically, full employment has been an unemployment rate of 4%. And we know we've been operating in an environment where we are, the US economy, due to a variety of factors that we've talked about in the past, we have a very low unemployment rate currently.
Yeah, because I'm looking here for November that just came out. Ohio's at 4.2,
Yeah.
and the United States at 3.7.
Right. Yeah,
But they're still trying to figure out where all the people are.
right, exactly.
Well, the 10 million that aren't working are included in the
Mhm.
interesting dilemma,
Yeah,
which we
it
didn't
is.
have ever in the past.
But a lot of them are not included in that.
No,
That is just,
no.
yeah.
That
I
is
was gonna
just.
say
people
they're
that
not,
get-
because they've fallen off the radar.
Yes, exactly. They fall outside of the data set that the Bureau of Labor Statistics looks at to determine the
Mhm.
unemployment rate.
So
Yeah.
it's really skewed.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's one thing when we look at the employment to population ratio, those are down as well. And that accounts, just kind of confirms, oh, yes, there's 10 million people or whatever that have never returned to work. And yes, that employment to population ratio is down. But, there still is no clear answer as to why haven't those folks returned to work. Okay, we know there's been an increase in the number of people that have retired.
Some are dead, some are
Some
baby
dead.
boomers.
Yeah.
Some are, yeah.
So there has been some of that.
And
But
there's fewer
there's-
people too.
Mhm.
That's the big problem, is there's fewer people. COVID pushed a
Right.
lot of people out of retirement that were gonna stick around.
Yeah,
And then you have the Gen Zs that they just don't care to go out and
right.
necessarily get a full-time or part-time job, they're just not as motivated
Yeah.
as some. There's a whole flux of things,
Mhm.
other than the myth that everyone's just staying home because the government's paying them to stay home.
Right.
That's just completely false.
Right.
So,
We're open too.
what?
I still get phone calls that ask if the office is open sometimes. It blows my mind. It's like we haven't been closed for almost 2 years. Anyway,
Right.
yeah. So we're open. Come see us.
Come see it, right. Yeah, so certainly I think 2023 is going to be a very interesting year from the perspective of really following closely the data. And the next page kind of gives a snapshot of some of the data that we think is really pertinent in this type of environment, which is looking at the leading economic indicators. So that is the turquoise line on the top. So this would be within all the economic indicators that are released. There's hundreds of them. This is picking out those that give us a view to future economic activity. So orders, so manufacturers' orders, are they getting more orders or less orders? Are companies looking to be adding more workers or not? What's happening with interest rates? What does the market think is going to happen as well? And as we can see, looking at the turquoise line, currently it has trended down. And if we look back historically, we can see whenever it has trended down, we've had a downturn that's been during a time of a recession, when that leading economic indicator.
And I know one of our key indicators, especially within the county, is our box manufacturers.
Oh, okay.
When
Yes.
they are laying people off and they're
Yeah.
complaining of a downturn in work,
Mhm.
it's a trickle down, because that means
Yes.
stuff's
Mhm.
not shipping, stuff's not being produced as much.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's great, right? You have a,
we have
Yeah.
like a yellow canary.
yes,
Yeah.
that's right. A local indicator, which, the kind of the anecdotal evidence, you're
Mhm.
right, is
Yeah.
is
It's-
very powerful.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and we contrast this with like the lagging indicators, which are things like the unemployment rate. This is historical information. These are things that have already happened. How many people are currently on unemployment insurance? How many orders have been filled, shipped, things of that nature. And so what we're seeing here is a divergence, as we do many times in those indicators. We have the leading coming down, the lagging has continued to increase, which then gives us these mixed signals in this. Sometimes the indicators go, oh, well, everything's going fine because look, this indicator came out, it shows positive job growth. Oh, okay. the economy is going to be fine, and then we look at another indicator and it's headed in the opposite
You
direction.
guys gotta rewrite the book after next year.
Yeah, right. It's definitely, definitely different environment.
Well, and these lines converge or nearly converge during every recession,
Yes.
it looks like, for the most
Yes.
part on here. We're at convergence now
Yes.
and not in a recession technically.
Technically, yes.
So it's a strange moment
Yeah.
for sure.
Of
Yeah.
course, they're trying to redefine
What the definition
what a
is.
recession is.
I'm trying to reassure everyone, but yet let's keep bumping the rates up to keep controlling it and stopping.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
So this is, of course, all had a great impact on interest rates, as you know, mentioned in the beginning. Is yes, it's been an interesting year, and as an investor, it's been a very rewarding year because, as we know, interest rates have increased very significantly. So we've been able to benefit from the Fed moving rates, and of course, as we get into the portfolios, we may recall we had additionally done some reallocation of funds from cash into the investment portfolio. So looking at the level of interest rates now, which is the turquoise line, we have an inverted yield curve, so meaning that the short-term interest rates are higher than the longer-term interest rates, and that is in and of itself generally a reliable indicator that the U.S. economy will be headed into a recession in the next 6 to 12 months. And we've had an inverted yield curve here for at least about almost 6 months. So this market signal has been pointing in that direction, that a recession.
And it
will occur.
coincides with the bumps in the
Yes.
rates.
Yes, exactly. And so we know what happens when U.S. economy enters into recession. The Fed has to then pivot. They have to shift course generally, and they will then turn around and lower interest rates. So the rates that we're seeing today, we think, present opportunities that may not be here over the course of as we get into 2023, particularly the latter half of 23, that the rate environment may shift. And we want to make sure that we're positioning the county's portfolios to protect it against what could be an environment where the Fed then has to drop rates very quickly and the longer rates drop as
Yeah.
well. Any other questions, comments?
You taking this all in over there, young man?
Sure. am.
He's quiet.
Did you help prepare this today? Or?
Did.
Okay, I was gonna say, I have a feeling you have some knowledge here, so yeah, right on, that's good.
And actually, I'll let Gabe speak to the portfolio.
Yeah, so just taking a look at the portfolio snapshot here, as of 11/30, as it says, just under $54 million of cash. That, of course, does include SAR Ohio balance as well. And then securities just over 166 million for the total portfolio that we looked at, just north of $220 million. So if we look
Which, as just an inflection point, is significantly more than we have had in there at any past point.
Yes.
We'll get to that at the year-end statistics position, but I just want to point that out. That has consequences in other places, not the least of which are budgetary, right? But
Yes.
it's a good thing overall, but
Yeah,
just for the sake
absolutely.
of making a note of that.
Yeah, the size of the portfolio and also just knowing where we're at in the yield market right now and knowing where rates are. Obviously paints a pretty nice picture when we get down
Right.
there. But yeah, looking at some of those metrics there on your securities, the weighted average maturity 2.31 years. As Eileen alluded to, that's something we'll talk about some more. Starting to now look at how can we lock in and potentially start to move that weighted average maturity just a little further out. And then the weighted average yield 2.44%. Obviously, knowing we have quite a mix in the portfolio of investments that were made some time ago, and we look at where we're investing right now, we see quite a mix in the portfolio. So we're also going to be able to see some opportunities for that number to trickle up here over time. When you multiply that out, though, the estimated annual interest income, just over $4 million. And when we look at the period and then the year-to-date interest number, so the period from the last time we had a meeting, $473,000, and then year-to-date interest, we see right around $1.1 million. Obviously, like I said, when we look at that number versus our estimated annual interest income, we know that we're on an upward curve of the rates that we're reinvesting at. So the interest we've received year to date, we know we're going to trickle up to start seeing a larger annual number next year that we actually receive. But then, yeah, just looking at the breakdown of the asset allocation, obviously we're mostly heavily weighted there in U.S. treasuries and agencies. And then slightly smaller there, your FDIC insured, those are your CDs, CRs, negotiable CDs. And then municipals as well, commercial paper at 2%, corporate bonds taking up 14%, and then just the remainder of 1% in the money market fund. And the maturity distribution just points a picture a little bit more about what I talked about earlier. We know that we're at 2.31 years on your average maturity. We are right around the 30% in the 3 to 5 year range, which is right on our target of where our portfolios have been up to this point. And then, which obviously leaves us about 60% inside of that 3 year window.
Yeah, so we'll be looking to increase that
70%.
beyond the 3
Mhm.
into the 3 to 5 year mark to about 40%. Yeah,
Yep.
which will give us then the 60% inside of 3 years.
Okay. This is the interesting one. When I look at all these yields, I'm like, I remember when we used to do the happy dance if we got over 1%
Right.
because everything was so low, and now look, fours,
Or
threes and fours.
exactly, when we look at, of course, there was additional funds added to the portfolio in this past quarter. As we moved monies, treasury moved monies from, the liquid account into the investment portfolio, gave us that opportunity, as we talked, to lock in these higher interest rates, which will provide that stability on the interest income side. And interestingly enough, the weighted average yield of those purchases, many purchases, was 4.46% last quarter. Our purchases, the weighted average yield was 3.3. So again, rates have increased. We want to make sure we're investing in all interest rate environments, but doing it judiciously and very disciplined to take advantage of the current rates and get those locked in.
Brad, as you had mentioned, we look at just year-end statistics. Obviously, as I said, 11/30, 166 million in the portfolio size, significantly larger than what we see in previous years, like you said. And as Eileen said, we did have an influx of funds in the last quarter to invest. And then obviously, if you look at the yield there, 2.44%, and looking at the annualized interest income for just over $4 million, and those will match your snapshot.
And you just look at last year, again,
Yeah.
less than 1%. That's
Quite a
what I
big
was
difference.
saying. It wasn't that long
Quite a
ago.
big
We were
difference.
excited to get near 1.
Right.
Yes,
Now it's-
exactly.
We are positioned well to take advantage of this particular moment, which is good. And I would just point out, because we've been talking about how there was an influx into the portfolio in the past quarter. We did that very carefully.
Yes.
So there was a number of conversations with Dennis, our chief deputy, about cash flow needs and kind of where our projections are and what we need to have on hand to be prepared for any of that kind of consideration. So we're still very comfortable with where we are from a liquid cash standpoint. I have mentioned in the past a couple of times, and I think probably with the fact that we have a new budget director coming on board and a new auditor coming on board in March, that it would be worth having some regular conversations about cash flow, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I know that information gets communicated, but a lot of times it's on paper. And so just having a conversation quarterly maybe is something we want to flag trying to do.
Good idea.
So I've talked to the incoming auditor about that a little bit, and he, I think, is receptive to that too. So we'll see.
So the balance of the report has the individual holdings of the portfolio that, as we had summarized in the snapshot as well.
And I'm just going to go through that really quickly here before I turn off the screen share. This will be posted to the treasurer's website, as are all past reports through, I think, 2013. So, if you want to dig in on these more, you have the opportunity to do that. Anyone in this room or out of this room. But that's what the balance of this is. So I'm running through it for the sake of having gone through it here, but then I'll stop that. We'll move on to the next piece. So.
Any other questions or comments?
No. Okay, so you do a great job detailing and updating this.
So then-
Important.
Yeah, so then I need a motion to accept the report as presented.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
No abstentions or no votes, so that passes. Other business, I just want to give you all an update on GrowLink since
How's
we've
it
been
going?
in the field for a while. It's going. So the first probably and most important update is that Middlefield Banking Company is going through some organizational transitions as an entity. So while they are doing that, they are out of the program
Yes.
So, you know, we've hit the pause button with them. I will revisit that with their leadership team once they have finished this organizational shift that is happening for them.
So that leaves us
Um,
with Portage Community and Hometown.
At
right?
Hometown, right. We have 5 loans that have been done so far, all through Hometown Bank. They're all residential at this point. And so that process is moving forward. They've all been for $25,000. And the home values have ranged from 173 to 300, 301. And we're doing windows and doors, septic systems, foundation waterproofing. So
Have
the
we
same
had
sort
any
of
of the
stuff we
business
were
or
doing.
farmers?
We have
Anything
not had
to
any
expand
farmer
on that?
conversations yet.
Okay.
We've had conversations with a number of business entities who are interested. And I went and talked to Brad Earhart and his economic development table group. So not the chambers group that he meets with regularly, but
No.
the other one.
The economic development
Yeah.
folks.
So they are aware of it. So we're starting those conversations. My plan,
Yeah.
because we're in the holidays, is to let that sit for a little bit, obviously.
And
And
after the
then
first.
After Martin Luther King Day, probably revisit that with people and do a little bit more wholesome or wholesale conversation on how we market it better
Educate
to
them, yeah.
businesses in particular. So
Yeah, because I
We'll
don't think
see.
that people quite realize how we expanded it, what it can
yeah,
cover.
I think there's some more public communication that can be done more effectively. I still think too, we're working with our banking partners on the back end to get the back end part of it nailed down because it's a new process for them because it's just in time funding. So before we bought one hunk and then we kind of did lending against that hunk and then renewed it annually, which is not the model we're doing now. We're doing small CDs for each individual loan that are matched. That's proving to be a little bit of a
Challenge.
stumbling block. We'll get there. It's just, you know, we need a little repetition. So that's where that is. But I just want to make sure that you guys were aware of how we were doing and what's going on with that. So any questions about that or?
What's the usual interest rate that we're charging on those ones?
I
25.
remember 3%. It was. I don't know. What is it now?
Gosh, I don't have I have that in the chart, but not what I printed and brought over. I think these were all 5 1/4-ish. You know, so they're getting a discount on that. I think about 1%. Because that's where the math landed for Hometown when these were done. These were all done between July and September. You know, so any of them now are going to be better.
So they're very competitive,
Mhm.
actually.
Yeah, so I think again, it's just a matter of educating folks and as those rates continue to go up, there's going to be more demand for this kind of thing, I think. So there you go. That's it.
Is there a cap on our interest rate that we would charge? Or will it just vary with the banks?
So the rates are tied to the federal funds rate. We can't get less than 0 and the discount can't be more than 3.
Yeah.
So that's the range, you know, and then within that, the formula applies. Yeah. Yep, no problem. Any further discussion or questions or anything? Okay.
No.
Then it is 2:36. I think I'm reading it right. You got that too?
Yep.
Okay. Need to get my eyes checked, I guess. So motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded, and without objection, we are adjourned. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. It was nice
Pleasure.
meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
And our next meeting will be for reorganization purposes. That will not be until March. So we'll, I don't have that date offhand because I should have written it down and didn't, but it is on the schedule. And I'll send you a reminder when we're closer. So, okay,
Perfect.
thank you very much.
Be here before we know it.
It's coming down by text.